All right, we are live. Alhamdulillah. All right, assalamu alaikum, and welcome to our third episode of Balancing the Conversation, which is a series of conversations promoting open discourse on critical issues surrounding COVID-19. My name is Luisa Valadez. I'm a certified holistic nutritionist and founder of Nourished, where I teach spiritual nutrition, stewardship, homesteading, and I challenge politically correct food science, and I help Muslims eat their way to excellence. Alhamdulillah. I will be moderating today's session as well as supporting you via email in between sessions. And during our last session, we covered the consequences of censorship. So we talked about mass psychosis, retaliation, self-censorship, and the implications for our leaders. And today we are going to be talking about science. This is a very important topic. So what is science? What does Islam say about science? How does science help us? And what are the limitations of science? Ultimately, in this conversation, what we want is to help you understand what science is, how to use it, and also how to identify misuses of science. All right. And so today we have with us our distinguished Sheikh, Abdullah bin Hamid Ali. He is an assistant professor of Islamic law and prophetic tradition at Zaytuna College in Berkeley, California. And he is the founding director of the Lamppost Education Initiative, where he, alongside other esteemed scholars, are dealing with the critical issues of our time and having the hard conversations that nobody else wants to have, helping Muslims overcome any sense of dissonance about their religion, alhamdulillah. And we also have our esteemed Dr. Mazen Atassi, Doctor of Naturopathic Medicine, somatic trauma therapist, instructor of Islamic psychology at Cambridge Muslim College, and the founder of Forward to Health, which is a holistic wellness clinic and educational initiative where he practices and teaches vitalistic natural medicine, which is also known as hikmah in the Islamic tradition. And before I ask my first question, I would like to ask Sheikh Abdullah to please start us off with a dua.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء وسيد المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. اللهم زدنا ولا تنقصنا وأكرمنا ولا تهنا وأعطنا ولا تحرمنا وآثرنا ولا تؤثر علينا وارض عنا وأرضنا يا رب العالمين. ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العظيم. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم.
All right. So the first question is for Dr. Mazen. And the first question is really, what is science?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. So that's an excellent first question. In a nutshell, science is a systematic method of inquiry. It is a process. It is an experimental expression and an operationalizing of a type of curiosity towards the phenomenological world. Okay, it is a verb. It is not a noun. It is not a thing. It is certainly not an ideology or a religion, perhaps even, as it is making itself to be. And it's a good question to start with because in some way, many people have a type of misunderstanding or a unhealthy relationship with science, right? Science is a tool by which people try to understand the world, but people differ in that understanding. People differ in their perception of the world, different perspectives and backgrounds and insights and so forth that we alluded to last time. This is natural, normal, and healthy. It's important to note that for Muslims, we don't believe in consensus in anything beyond the knowledge of wahi, of revelation. We're not supposed to have consensus in the knowledge of the world. That's not something that was expected of us, nor something that was traditionally sought or forced or manufactured. Even in a story of the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, which many of you perhaps know, where the Prophet ﷺ was walking by Sahaba who were pollinating date palms. And he was curious and he asked what they were doing, and they told him they were pollinating the date palm. This is what we have to do to ensure the proper harvest next season. And the Prophet ﷺ made a gesture or a sign or some sort of an expression of just awe or something, you know. I'm not really sure. Maybe Sheikh Abdullah could chime in, but there's something there. He just kind of skeptical or something about it. So the Sahaba picked up on that, and they didn't do it that season. They didn't do what they normally have done for hundreds and thousands of years or whatever. And the next harvest was deficient. And they asked the Prophet ﷺ why that was. And he said, what did you change? And they said, we didn't, we saw you kind of making some sort of gesture when you saw us doing what we were doing. And he said, listen, this is the affair of your world. This is not something that I've come here to legislate. This is, I just was commenting as, a passerby. So, in some way, the Prophet ﷺ here, what I'm taking from this today is that the Prophet ﷺ was curious, which is really the bottom line of science. We have a curiosity towards the world, but he was also kind of a skeptic, just kind of looking at it like, what are you guys doing? And that's not an unhealthy relationship with the world. That is scientific, right? The type of skepticism, a curiosity, observing something and just being like, why is that? What's going on here? Right? That's what I take from that. But what you find today is that people who are practicing science, believers in science, they will say stuff like, if only the other side accepts the facts, if only they could see the science, if only they would understand the facts in reality, they would change their minds. What's wrong with them? It's like they can't see reality. They must be stuck in their own confirmation bias. If only they were like me, a free thinker and a champion of truth, they could see the real reality of things and fix them. Oftentimes, both sides, of the scientific kind of disagreement can say stuff like this. And this is science. This kind of thing, this back and forth is science, right? I mean, in some way it has to be healthy and not talking about confirmation bias and people are deluded and this and that, and they're not being scientific. But this back and forth has always been. And this is the process by which we ascertain knowledge of this level of the world. What we're finding, of course, today is that this traditional scientific perspective, this culture of inquiry, is being tossed out the door and instead supplanted by this type of rigid ideology that is using the garb and the authority of science to push some sort of agenda. But that's not what science is innately. Science is a method of inquiry. And it is something that is very, I believe, fitri, and something that maybe we can speak to a little bit later, inshallah ta'ala. I'll stop there.
Sheikh Abdullah,
Yeah.
in our last session,
Mhm.
you were talking about the scientific method, but we didn't really get to go too much into it. Can you elaborate what you were going at last time?
Yeah, well, I think probably a good statement to make prior to doing that is to mention that scientists, as we generally understand them to be, don't really have any monopoly on the definition of science, right? In the sense that first and foremost, we know that science has many different definitions, and one particular definition takes into consideration the particular a systematic way about reaching a particular conclusion, right? So in that sense, the Islamic sciences are true sciences, like the sciences of the Quran, the sciences of the Hadith of the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, right? And so fundamentally, the goal of any science is to reach knowledge, and that particular knowledge that we want to reach is the knowledge of what is real and what is true, right? Now, the scientific method that when we talk about this, again, I'm not a medical expert, but however, as I mentioned during the previous conversation, that anyone can learn the scientific method, right? And fundamentally, what you're talking about is hypothesis, right? And then testing your hypothesis to see if what you conclude or you guess what is to occur after your experiment will lead to the conclusion that you had already assumed it would be. And if it turns out that it was it accorded with your assumption, then we'll say that this is a fact, right? And if it did not accord with your assumption, we say that this is not a fact. So we now have to alter our ideas about what is real, right? And so it's one of the things that was interesting about the pre-modern period is that the pre-modern period was highly influenced by philosophy, right? And then modernity came in, and modernity fundamentally placed a very significant influence on quantitative measurements, right? And sort of it excluded things from the natural realm that were assumed to be part of the natural realm prior to that period, which included the human being to an extent, right? So human emotions and appetites and those type of issues, thoughts were part of nature, right? According to the pre-modern people. Modernity set in, all of a sudden these things were excluded. Why? Because these are qualitative issues, right? You can't really put a number or measurement on them. It's very difficult to measure love or hate, right? You can't really quantify that, for instance. So they decided that the only things that actually constitute true science are the things that fall within the material realm, right? That we can perceive with our five senses, those things that we can know through experimentation. Like, for instance, we know that fire burns. A child may not conclude that the first time a child touches the pilot on the stove, right? And so I got burned. It may not conclude that, but second time and third time, eventually the child will understand. Oh, that thing there, it burns, right? So this fundamentally establishes a fact or something which is real, or something that is true, right? And the goal of both philosophy and science is to reach truth, and truth meaning reality, right? And so as Dr. Mazen he mentioned, that we're living in a time where the scientific method has actually been abandoned, at least in the public sphere, right? And it takes advantage that those in control of the narrative are taking advantage of the ignorance of the vast majority of the population whose education unfortunately has failed them, right? So I'm sorry to go on so long, but hopefully that sufficiently explains what's meant by the scientific method.
Okay, thank you for that. So, Dr. Mazen, how does new science come about? How do people discover a new science?
So new science comes about from continually applying the scientific method, which I believe is not something necessarily scientific. I believe that it's a type of fitri, an inclination. Like Sheikh Abdullah alluded to, the child is curious about the world and wants to understand the world, and it tries to grasp and reach for the world. So, when we find something new in the world, we want to bring it into the sphere of comprehension, the sphere of understanding, maybe of utility. If there's something beneficial there, nafi' for Bani Adam, we want to be able to incorporate that. And we've always, as Muslims, had this idea that al-hikmatu dallatul mu'min, that wisdom is the lost riding beast of the animal. فَأَيْنَمَا وَجَدَهَا فَهُوَ أَوْلَى بِهَا. Wherever he finds it, he has more right to it. So the Muslims were amazingly curious. And the Prophet ﷺ created a civilization that within a couple hundred years reached the pinnacle of the time in every science and every art and engineering and mathematics and medicine and astronomy and physics and chemistry, and not to mention the spiritual arts. Everything that came about from this civilization was the pinnacle, because he established it, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, on these principles of inquiry, on objectivity, on observation, on testing, on all of that comes from our fitri element that is built upon in the faith. So when we find something new that we want to be able to understand, we apply these principles. We apply, okay, you see something new, we create an hypothesis, right? What do I think is going on here? I'm observing it. It seems like this is causing that. So, okay, in my hypothesis is that X causes Y. Let's create a test, some sort of experiment to check that. Okay, so I run this test, I get this data. Let me see how that runs and analyze it, and how that confirms or throws out my initial hypothesis. And then I want to, maybe that creates a new question. And then we begin to kind of rinse and repeat this process. That is doing science, right? That's healthy. That's beautiful. That's what builds civilization. That's what creates culture. That's what creates technology and ease for people, right? This is what saves lives. This is what creates comforts, so forth. Alhamdulillah. Science can be good. Science is innately good when it's used properly, when it's put in its proper place, right? It becomes something totally ugly and distorted and like a Frankenstein kind of discipline when it's put on a pedestal, when it's put out of its box and put in a place where it shouldn't be. Now, in the place of religion, as an arbiter of truth and righteousness, that if you're not scientific, there's something wrong with you, that you're not on the same page, that you're something, you're not being rational, you're not being empirical, you're not being scientific. There's this whole kind of culture around science now, even within the Muslim community, which is very troubling, right? But I digress. Going back, how do we find new science? I mean, it's not, you don't find science, right? You don't find a new science. Science is the method, right? And then you apply science and you find new knowledge of the world. And that's what really the scientific method is really about. It's trying to understand the world of Allah.
Yeah.
And trying to come into a higher knowledge. And when you understand the world and creation of Allah Ta'ala, and you learn the asbab, the means of Allah's sunnah, the means of Allah's way, His cause and effect, and these relationships in the world, you gain a higher knowledge of the creator, of the sustainer, of the one who is the musabbib, who causes these means. This is what science is all about. It's a spiritual pursuit. It's not something for domination, for control, this is something very vital. Right? In Islamic science, it's something that should cause awe, bewilderment, ma'rifah in the highest sense, the knowledge of God, gnosis. It's not a control, right? But as Dr. Abdullah alluded to, right, in the Enlightenment period, there was a shift from this holistic, qualitative approach to the world, that the world is sacred, it's alive, it's animated, right? God is directly creating and sustaining and deriving it. And we can come to know it, have a greater sense and a greater interfacing with God by interfacing with His creation. That was totally ruptured in post-Enlightenment Cartesian dualism, and science just ended up, unraveling at the seams, continually for the past 100 years, ever since then.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Can I interject? There was something that Dr. Mazin mentioned earlier about consensus, and I think this is an important point to focus on for a minute. In that, I think that it could sound for some people somewhat problematic to hear someone say that we're not supposed to sort of follow consensus, and I think that of course. You can naturally explain this. I understand exactly what you meant by that when you stated. You weren't saying that there is no basis for consensus in Islam, right? When it comes to religious judgments, for instance. However, what we're fundamentally, my understanding of what you were saying, and of course you can correct this, is that fact and the truth is not built upon a majority vote or a consensus vote, right? That scientific fact is not based upon 97% of scientists say that global warming is real, for instance, and we say, hey, well, that means it's real, right? Or any other thing like this. If we say that most of the scientists that we see on television are saying that this or that about COVID-19, then it has to be real, right? But that's not the way that you establish truth. Truth is not determined by a democratic process or by a democratic vote, right? It's determined by an objective process, an objective criteria. And then once we apply the most objective criteria that we have, then we can either arrive at 100% truth or at least near certainty, right? As a result of that. Right?
Yeah, exactly. I know what I was alluding to was this idea that in our epistemology, we have three sources of knowledge. We have wahi, which is revelation, Quran, Sunnah. We have reason, and then we have the senses, empirical knowledge. So I was speaking to consensus of the third. Consensus in the first two are established. Yeah, that's orthodoxy. That's Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. No one is rejecting that. It's in the somehow it trickles down to the third now. We're trickling down the consensus of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah into empiricism, which is not something that has, I don't think, ever been done. I could be mistaken there, but I don't think it's ever been done in our tradition. We say we ask, a certain person, a specialist in something, or maybe 10 of them, and then if they agree, khalas, we have consensus, and everyone has to abide by that. That's never been the case. So it's in the third epistemic source of knowledge, which is empiricism, al-hissiyat, the senses. That's when it's subjective, like you can differ, and people generally differ, and that's also one of the sunnah of Allah Ta'ala. So.
Right. Yeah. No, thank you for that. Yeah, I wanted to make sure that we had to be clear on that. And I would probably, I think I can add is that what's fundamentally flawed about the attitude of many of our fuqaha today, who actually have embraced the idea that forced vaccination, for instance, is Islamic, or your Islamic duty to get a vaccine or so-called vaccine, is that they're building that particular judgment on a false premise, right? That is not built upon a scientific method, right? It's built upon a democratic method, right? And it's a very limited democratic method because they're only giving consideration to certain voices in the medical community, right? The ones that they trust, right? And then they say, well, because of this, because these people we know who are experts in the medical field, who may not be experts in virology or epidemiology, but this is still their general field, that we are going to say that Muslims are required, or it's your religious duty to actually to get the jabs, to be vaccinated, right?
So then building on that, how are Muslims supposed to use science? From what you're saying, you're kind of alluding to that in a way, like the way they're using it right now versus how they are supposed to use it. Can you give us some insight on that?
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, with Dr. Mazen, he made this point about empiricism, that no religious judgment is supposed to be built upon something which is not empirical. In other words, we live in a world of truth and reality, objective truth and reality, right? And so when we pass a moral judgment about a thing, then it should be constructed or built upon what is actually happening on the ground, right? What's the actual facts, right? Which have been proven by scientific method, right? So, but before there's even any science the science, in other words, it's as if like the scientific method was abandoned, and in certain cases claimed to have been applied in a newer fashion with regard to, for instance, the judgment that the vaccines are safe. Say, okay, well, we didn't do the long-term studies because we didn't accelerate it long-term study. There was like concurrent, groups of that we were studying all together at one time, so that we abandoned the normal process, and as a result of it, we knew that the vaccines were safe, which was a big lie. You can't have long-term studies when no long time has actually transpired, right? And so how can you? It's a contradiction in terms. It's very manipulative, So you have to let the time go by, right? There's no way that you can speed up time, right? There's no way for you to speed up the process where you observe the types of potential harms that can happen to a person if they infect themselves with something, right? Which was the case with other or proper vaccines, right? So there's a misapplication of scientific method. There's a lot of manipulation, a lot of lying, misleading information. And so the proper way to offer a fatwa and then encourage the community to react to the situation is to first establish what is actually happening on the ground, right? And that wasn't done. Right?
Okay. Well, thank you for that.
Yeah.
So moving to the next topic, what I wanted to ask Dr. Mazen is, if you can give us an example of science being used under the Khilafah or by the Prophet of Islam. So basically, how does science help us is what we want to illustrate here. How does it benefit people's lives?
Okay. I mean, again, going back to the example, for example, of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, seeing the Sahaba cross-pollinating the date palms, that was scientific. Any type of inquiry into the nature of the world is scientific. We have, for example, in the early period, Ibn al-Haytham, who is a physicist and scholar, and who was applying the scientific method 5 centuries before Galileo, even though they say now, if you read up online, the scientific method was originated by Galileo. And it's not. You read Ibn Haytham 5 centuries before Galileo. Ibn Haytham was a physicist. He was a master and creator, basically, of the discipline of optics. He studied light and used lenses of convex and concave lenses to focus and disperse light. And he was the inventor of optics. And no one built on that for hundreds of years after him. He's mastered it so well. So, I mean, people are familiar with books on science in Islam. I don't have any examples to pull out of my pocket right now, but like science has been applied through the entire Islamic cultural project, from the inception throughout the Abbasid and the later Ottoman and everyone in between. And the idea, though, that I want to establish here and I want to offer is that Islam is not, we're not saying we're anti-science. This is a really important point. We're not anti-science. Islam is scientific in the sense that it practices this fitri, it employs this fitri inclination towards observing, being curious, inquiring, asking questions, retesting, confirming, checking out other people, having dialectic, and then arriving eventually at a conclusion. But even then, that's not rigid. It can be totally supplanted later if there's more knowledge, right? That can be, and you saw that in the West when there was this we believe that the sun moved around the earth. They believed for hundreds of years, and maybe even the Muslims as well. And maybe there was a difference of opinion. And then at some point we had more knowledge, and then we saw actually that it was an illusion, optical illusion, that we were moving around the sun, and that became now consensus, right? That was healthy science. People died, people were burned at the stake. Books of these people that were opposing the orthodoxy of science at the time were totally rejected. So this is a familiar track. This is repeating history. We've always repeated history. But the idea that, we are anti-science, that we're Luddites or something like that, like, it's not true. Like, we're not against technology and progress, but there is a balance. And this is what maybe differentiates Islamic science from non-Islamic science, is that we believe that there is this, that the world is animated and it's an organism. Like, science uses metaphors, and it's like a guiding kind of story and how we relate to the world. So initially, before modernity and post-modernity, the world was an organism or an ecosystem. It was alive. It was a creation. It was sentient. Later, it became a machine. The world is a machine. It's objective. You can break it down into parts. It's reliable. It can be reduced without changing its nature, and so forth. And so these assumptions crept in that changed the entire way that we relate to the nature, to the world, right? Whereas Muslims, we don't believe that we believe that there is a balance, right? And so in establishing the balance, and as Surah Al-Rahman alludes to, preserving the balance, right? Maintaining the balance, that there's this balance between heaven and earth that the human being is responsible for. Inshallah ta'ala, may Allah make all of us of those people who establish and maintain that balance. And so there's a way that we can be in the world to understand that balance and how to preserve that balance and how to use that balance for human benefit and benefit of the rest of the world without thwarting and destroying that balance innately. And for example, I mean, I can go off the track here, but like in global warming science, right? The science of global warming now, right? Everyone's concerned with climate change. Okay. What are the leaders of these countries doing now? They're saying It's all because of carbon. It's carbon's fault. So if we can just find a way to reduce carbon and become green-friendly countries and corporations, we're doing our due diligence. So if you have a German company who is taking lumber from the Amazon forest and destroying, wreaking havoc on the most vital, lush, and well-preserved ecosystem left on Earth in the Amazon rainforest, taking lumber, taking resources, shipping them across the Atlantic to German coal plants, right, for mining and then reproducing and repackaging into some sort of product. If that company can somehow find a way to like make an electric ship instead of a steam ship across the Atlantic, and a coal factory turning into some like wind factory, and somehow decreasing the carbon load, carbon emission from this company's, net kind of production, and it can become green and stamped with the UN stamp of approval, then it can keep going to the rainforest and raping it and ravaging it all at once because this carbon, limit is being maintained. I mean, this is idiocy. This is lack of hikmah. This is satanic. This is just sophistry, right?
Right.
So this is science now. Unfortunately, it's lost the forest for the trees. It's lost the whole. We've reduced life to viruses and carbon and these inanimate, elements of life, and created agendas and created programs for the world and economies and politics and all sorts of things. So this is not a science that Islam can stand by. This is a very problematic science. And there's people like Sayyid Hussein Nasr, who has been for like 50 years rallying this cry. And may Allah bless him. He's really an impressive voice in this field. And he's calling for the revival of an Islamic science and using the environmental crisis as kind of the context of this revival. Because if you look once you see it, you can't unsee it. And it's a huge problem, and it's affecting the future of humanity. SubhanAllah, as is now this COVID crisis. The post-COVID world is very different than the pre-COVID world, just like the post-industrial world on the environment is way different than the pre-industrial world for the environment. And so these are grades and scales that we have to be able to attend to and name, and then connect back to the root problem. And as Muslims, create, solutions for, have a discourse that we can find an authentic contribution for, that's authentic, that speaks to the truth of our tradition, that speaks for the environment and the Kawn. As khulafa, talking about khilafah, we are khulafa, and we're responsible for this.
Absolutely.
Right?
A lot of people are afraid to step into that. Yeah, when we mention that, people are a bit taken aback. They don't realize the responsibility that we actually have. Like you just said, we are here, and we have a responsibility. You mentioned what science is now. That kind of goes to the question I wanted to ask Sheikh Abdullah, which is, I'm going to quote you something that Dr. Fauci said. And it's very popular. I think it went all over the internet. People are familiar with it. So it was an interview that he had somewhere, and where he said, attacks on me, quite frankly, are attacks on science. All right. So all of the things I have spoken about consistently from the very beginning have been fundamentally based on science. Sometimes those things were inconvenient truth for people, and people want to fire me or put me in jail for what I've done, namely follow the science. The question I have based on this quote is, what is the science that he's talking about, and how is it currently being used? How does it compare to the science that you were talking about, that both of you were talking about just a minute ago?
Well, this is one of the most important parts of the question about science, which is the what is called epistemology and philosophy. In other words, a theory of knowledge. What are the tools that you utilize to determine actual fact? And in this sense, Dr. Fauci sounds as if like he's saying that he is the determiner, the authoritarian, that he himself, whatever he says, is the science, right? And so, for instance, when we talk about usul al-fiqh, right, in Islam, when we say, okay, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't reveal a particular ruling about this new issue that didn't exist during the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, how do we discern God's judgment about this issue? You know, we go to the Quran, we go to the Sunnah, we go to the other sources of Islam, and that becomes, we say, the foundation of our epistemology. This is how we arrive at certainty or near certainty, at least. And depending on the sort of tool you utilize in the source of that knowledge, it will produce less or less certainty, or more or greater certainty, right? So when we talk about empirical knowledge, empiricity, or empiricism, when we talk about that, we're talking about what pretty much everyone would say is an objective way to determine what is real and what's factual, right? So if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks directly to someone, then that, of course, gives us 100% fact, you know. But since today we don't have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doing that anymore to anyone, then we're left to draw conclusions and to build our knowledge upon sources which vary in reliability, right? So Dr. Fauci, for instance, is not applying the science or science. He's applying the science, you know, meaning that whatever he says or what he deems to be the appropriate way that everyone should be understanding and reacting to what's happening in the world with respect to a particular crisis that he himself probably had a direct hand in, right? It's really unfortunate that so many people have put their trust in this man, who again, that he's been accused and exposed for many of great, you know, unfortunate atrocities, right? You know, for a number of decades, you know, and more and more people are writing about this. But he's not trustworthy to begin with. You know? So the question of, like, well, what's the source of your knowledge? How reliable is the source of that knowledge? Right, are important questions we always have to ask. Right, what type of integrity did this person have? And then even if we overlook whether or not the person has integrity, what sort of methods is that individual utilizing to draw these conclusions? Why are we only relying upon a single voice to determine, or even a few voices, to determine what is actually happening, especially an individual or people who are have so many conflicts of interest, right? Financial conflicts of interest with the pharmaceutical companies, with governments, the military, etc., the media. Their money's all tied up into all of these different institutions of influence. And again, just coming back to the question, it's very clear to me, and I'm quite sure it's clear to you, the two of you and others, that Dr. Fauci is being an authoritarian when he makes this statement. And basically, he's taking advantage of the fact that he knows a significant number of significant percentage of the population actually does put significant trust in him or treat him as if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks directly through him.
Right. Dr. Mazen, would you like to add?
Yeah, I mean, when you read that, I'm just like, this is straight hubris. You know, I'm sorry, not sorry. This is hubris. So for someone to identify themselves as the sole authority in the scientific realm, I mean, this is scientism, right? Yeah. This is, again, that ideology of science that I was speaking to and alluding to earlier. It's not a process. It's not a verb. It's not this fitri inclination, curiosity and testing and assessing. This is just belief system. This is a religion. And Fauci has made himself the pope of it. He's the pope of scientism. That's what he's saying, right? And he's saying that science now is becoming a religion without saying it. He's saying you are either an orthodox follower and believer of this faith or you're not. So there's a religion now of science. That's what he's saying when he says stuff like that. This, if you listen with your heart, with discernment, he's saying there's a religion of science, and this religion has a canon of holy texts. It has specialized language for the initiates,
Yes.
There's an initiation ordeal called graduate school. There's a ceremonial name change that happens after you finish this graduate school. There's a system of indoctrination of the youth. You can be excommunicated if you're a heretic through loss of funding.
Right. Yeah.
There are invisible beings that are accessible through divination techniques called technology, like looking at the microscope.
Right. Yeah.
There's deified saints and martyrs like Galileo and Newton and Einstein. There are lay believers that do not understand the esoteric knowledge of the religion, but believe in it anyways.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so on and so forth. This is a religion now. You know, and there's people that have taken it on wholesale. I saw people who are huffaz, asatidha, ustads in deen, religion, saying about a year ago or so, I follow Fauci. Fauci wrote this book on, I think it was pathology or maybe physiology or something, pathophysiology. I studied that book in medical school. He's an amazing man. I'm following him wherever he goes. This is a person of knowledge he has like teachers, and I know his teachers, and this is something very problematic. This is a type of shirk. This is a type of association with again, the place of, you're putting something in the place of faith, of your deen.
And people don't realize how heavily it's being done. You have imams actually saying, and I think I posted this at one time, they're saying, taking pictures, promoting it on the media, saying the vaccine is the only thing that can save us. Like, do people realize what is coming out of his mouth? Are you realizing what is being said? This is literally, if you look at our literature, you can see that this falls under the definition of shirk. Like, literally, it's just amazing to me how people gloss over it as if this is very, very deep stuff. So what I want to get back at is going from this question I was asking, because there's questions popping up here on the site. So people want to know, how does the average person use science to better understand the pandemic? Like, an example would be, if somebody wants to know if a mask works or doesn't work, what do they have to do to come to a conclusion about that?
Sorry, تفضل.
لا تفضل. No.
Listen, it goes back to the Quranic dictum. فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلِ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Just ask different people of different persuasions. There's not one authority in science. If you don't know, if you're not scientifically trained, if you don't know how to read literature, if you don't understand, what people are arguing about, but you want to understand, ask different people. And make sure you ask different people, and ask different people with different perspectives. And then you begin to learn about these different variant perspectives, rationales, and then you can begin to make judgments. I believe that everyone's totally capable of learning about the science of upper respiratory infections and basic immunology. I mean, it's not this, again, the sacred knowledge that you have to be initiated to get, and this esoteric, whatever liminal kind of knowledge that you have access to only when you have the garb and you've been donned with, the thing and anointed. There's nothing like that. Just learn, ask people. Now, you have to know who to ask, and there are specialists, but you'll find that even epidemiologists today, even public health experts today, even physicians today are differing on the issue of masks. They're differing on the issue of vaccination. They're differing on the idea, can you treat COVID? Some people say, well, we don't have any research on anything that's safe and anything that we can administer as treatment, so there's nothing. And then there's other people who are saying, I've been treating people since the beginning, and I haven't lost one person, and I've been treating in the thousands. Right? So, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلِ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. It may not be the person on the TV screen. It may not be the person who is standing with politicians in the background, giving recommendations daily on CNN. It may be this person online. It may be this person who people have been sharing his videos of, on different social media platforms. maybe censored, and you have to do some digging. There are people out there that know, and if you don't know, you can find out. But don't drink the Kool-Aid, as they say. Don't drink the Kool-Aid. You don't have to take what they're giving you because they say they are the arbiter of truth and righteousness in this affair. They're not. You don't believe them, right? You ask questions. You have to wake up and you have to ask questions and be skeptical, like the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What are you guys doing? Oh, you're cross-pollinating date palms. Why? Is that how it works? Is that the best way? I mean, like you ask questions, like you have to have that type of relationship now more than ever with science. When there's healthy science and there's healthy dialectic and people are going back and forth and there's journals and there's fierce debates and it's like this rigorous back and forth, cool. Like just sit back and just watch that and take it in and make your decision. But you might have to do some digging from now until we can restore science to its proper place. And so don't feel afraid and don't feel shy about doing that, regardless of the articles that come out say you can't understand the science and just trust the experts because it's way above you and you're so stupid and dumb and just keep binge watching Netflix and we'll tell you what to do. I'll never tell anyone that. I believe in human agency, informed consent. If you don't know, I'll teach you, or I'll take you to someone who can teach you, help you find the answers yourself. And that's what a good doctor, that's what a good, I believe, good authority, good parents do that. They don't just overwhelm their child with force. They edify, they educate. Doctor is teacher, nurturer, right? I want you to know. I want you to stand on your own 2 feet. That's good science.
Yes.
Yeah, I would add that one way that simplifies or could simplify things for most people is to follow those individuals who are from the medical field who, for one, they are the specialists in epidemiology and in virology, first and foremost. But more than that, I would say you would want to look closer at the individuals who actually are working in the field, who have had experience, which means individuals who are actually applying the scientific method. Like, for instance, Dr. Mazid talked about how there are some people, listen, I've been treating patients since the start of the epidemic or the pandemic with this or that medicine, and I haven't lost one patient, right? You see, so these are individuals who have experience with the use of different methods of treatment. They've been involved in early treatment. They're not only relying upon the vaccine, perhaps they haven't used the vaccine at all, again, if we can call it a vaccine, right? Because these are the people we really want to be focusing on. Dr. Fauci has not treated, to my knowledge, one individual who actually contracted COVID-19, right? And so he is not the authority on that. He is a government, he's a figurehead, right? In that sense, right? He's speaking for someone else, right? If not only himself. And so there are many of these doctors who are actually being censored, right? Some of them are reporters. Some of them are just concerned citizens who just have a lot of connections, and do very good research, right? People have been banned from Twitter. People have been banned from YouTube, right? And that would include people like, for instance, Alex Berenson, who was a former New York Times reporter, or Steve Kirsch, right, who had been banned. There's Robert F. Kennedy Jr., right, who's been banned from social media as well, right? That you need to consider, like, why are these people being banned from social media? Why are their voices and their opinions not being allowed to be heard by these major social media and mainstream media organizations? Basically, they're telling you that you can't think, be quiet, don't do your research. No, that's the worst thing you can do, right? You just need to listen to us. We can think for you. We'll think for you because you can't think for yourself. And the people telling you that are themselves individuals who follow a script. They're reporters, right? All they're doing is reading what's on the screen most of the time, or just simply reiterating some particular talking point that was given to them by their editors or their managers, right? And these are the people telling you, no, don't worry about. We'll filter all the false, fake information out for you. They're not experts in anything, right? Other than reading something from a screen on a teleprompter, right? And so we need to look for those individuals, the alternative media sources, people who actually are. You can find them in alternative media, people who actually have been banned from mainstream media and from social media. That this is where you're going to find the most reliable information, and of course, the most important of all of those individuals, I would say, would be the doctors who are frontline doctors who actually have been treating patients with unapproved, we would say, types of treatments, right? Because what's happened during this so-called pandemic is that doctors have been straitjacketed. They've been restricted from actually practicing their art. That a doctor has experienced. They know how to treat a person. They see symptoms. They see signs. They make a hypothesis. I think this particular medicine might work. I might as well try this. They haven't been allowed to do that, right? They've been threatened with firing, with having their licenses taken away from them. They're under great pressure. So these are not the people who are going to see them publicly taking the type of chances that like so many others have taken, and then it's led to them being blacklisted, right? So this is a time of great fitna, and we have to understand the big trick that's being played upon on not only just the ummah but on the world right now. And it's just unfortunate that I just see so many imams and scholars actually have fallen for it.
Yeah, that's so unfortunate. And we do, as the public, you should question, because there's this is a little bit off topic, but it kind of relates to what I wanted to say is, so the other day, here in Ontario, they're kind of strict. They're very, very strict, actually. And there's places they're not allowing you basic facilities like a restroom, things like that. It doesn't even matter if you're vaccinated or not anymore. It's because this is policy, and I can't. So I was at a doctor's office. Little one had to go. I asked, can she use it? It's an emergency. Oh, no, I can't. I'm like, but you're a doctor. This kid is a biological thing. She's got to go. Oh, I can't let you because this is a medical facility. You should go to the store over. So we go down the street, and nobody lets you. And so I asked the doctor, I'm like, this happened before already a couple of times. So why are you participating in this? Why are you allowing this to happen? Do you not have, any mercy on the child? I think if we bring them to responsibility, just ask them, let them face themselves, it could put a dent in things and help us get moving in the right direction. Because I know there's people asking, what do I do? What can I do? These are little things. You bring them to responsibility and ask them, do you think this is the correct thing to do to a small child? Why are you participating in this? And that's it. You don't have to really go further than that. But I kind of just want to shift the conversation a little bit to the questions that we have here that are coming in. Some are really good. So this one's particularly for, can't read that. Oh, there he goes. It loaded. So this is for Sheikh Abdullah. It says, many in the U.S. view everything through the lens of culture and the cultural divide between the right and the left. And it has tainted everything, including science. So how can Muslims free themselves from this divide and look at things from the Islamic lens as opposed to the right or left? I think this is really, really important.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's not only Muslims who have this problem. It's everyone right now. That the media apparatus, more than anything else, the mainstream media has contributed greatly to this divide. And once we had the lockdowns, people became much more political, right, than they typically would be, because they were forced to watch television, and in particular to watch the news. Most people don't watch the news. Right? People are watching cable TV, but during the lockdowns on the lead up to the presidential elections, people were forced to be concerned with politics, right? And they made decisions on the basis of their impressions of what they were seeing. And never before had they watched news as much and because of that, they and they weren't critical. They weren't able to realize that there was a lot of there are a lot of many untruths that have been spread about so many different things, right, in the mainstream media, right? So many people unfortunately still trust the mainstream media, and we have to put blame where it belongs, right? That it's right there in the mainstream media, but we have to understand too that there is this marriage between the mainstream media. And again, it's hard to overlook the divide, because there is a true divide that exists in that the left, is pretty much part of that establishment, right? That they are part of this particular new order, themselves, that they themselves, and there are people on the right as well who are part of that new order too. They're establishment people who are trying to bring in this new world, right? That usher in this new world that they want to actually materialize, right? So, and it's not so much to say that we want to put the blame on the left, right? It's simply because they're the left, right? But it's because they are the major contributors to this particular tyranny, right? That actually is happening right now. So it's them, and also in collusion with billionaire elites, with even the military, right? The federal authorities. Everybody's involved with this particular effort, right? That this is a big, and this is not conspiracy theory. This is conspiracy fact, right? Right. So it's like right in your face. They tell you right in your face, today, right? But you just have to know where to look. It's right there in plain sight. A lot of these things. And so I don't know how you break free of that without, because see there's this tendency for us to try to see the left and right as moral equivalents when it comes to dangers, right? We say, okay, well, we're working with the left. We need to work with the left because they're nicer to us. And then when people are saying, hey, we need to shift a little bit to the right, they say, no. We need a new party. I say, well, why is it so easy to work with the left, but it's now when somebody say move to the right a little bit, we have to start a new party, right? But the dangers from the left are much more significant than the dangers posed by the right, at least today, right now, especially being that the right is a populist party, right? It's Trump's party for the most part right now, still, right? And again, and this is not about voting, any of those type of things, but it's just about understanding where most of the power of the greater influence and manipulation is happening, right? That I found much more reliable information in right-wing media than I found in left-wing media, right? So it's, I don't know how to overcome that divide, but I just have to be totally honest about that, right? But as Muslims, we have to be principled. We have to, again, if we are applying scientific method, right? If we are concerned with truth, right? And we are concerned with the reliability of the information we're receiving, right? It'll be easy for us to discern it, that some media outlets, they're giving you their take on things. Another media outlet may say, hey, well, this is the evidence, this is the claim, and this is the evidence that backs it up, right? And you have to say to yourself, okay, well, which one's more reliable, right? Is firsthand information more reliable, or secondhand or tertiary sort of evidence, right? Which one's more reliable, right? What I see with my eyes and I hear with my ears, or what the media, the reporter tells me is happening, right? And the Kyle Rittenhouse case is one of the most obvious situations, examples of this, in that for an entire year, the mainstream media, again, the leftist media, right, has been lying about what happened. They've been concealing all of the video footage of what occurred, right? And then when they play it, they'll stop it, before you actually see what occurs with respect to people attacking Kyle Rittenhouse, right? On the other hand, the right-wing media, many of them, the unofficial right wing as well, have been showing us this information from the very beginning, right? So then it comes out now 1 year later that, okay, that this little boy unfortunately had been smeared as a white supremacist, member of a militia who crossed state lines with the gun. None of it true, right? And he came to a BLM protests, right? And he just shot a bunch of innocent people unprovoked, without being provoked to do anything, right? So that's just one of many different examples of this. You see, so it's I find it difficult to really say how you overcome that divide, other than to say that you have to be concerned about the sources of your information, right? And how reliable are the sources, how trustworthy are those sources, that we have over 90% of the information we receive in news is controlled by 6 major corporations, right? You go back about 20, 30 years ago, it was about 50 different corporations. Now it's only 6 of them, right? And everyone has a bottom line. Everyone's in the pockets of big pharma. Big pharma, it provides for almost half of the funding of the FDA, right, and other major institutions of our government, right? They sponsor our media corporations, right? You can see all the evidence of all these things right before our eyes, and we just have to revert back to those basic principles, that when a claim is made, we look at the reliability of the person making the claim. What type of moral integrity does the individual have? And then if the person is deemed to be morally sound, then we question the person's information. How accurate are they? What is the standards, principles, or the tools they utilize to determine the soundness of the information that the claims that they make? Is it first-hand information? Is it second-hand information? Is it hearsay? Is it made-up information? Because all those things affect the credibility of any individual. So we've been talking about the science today. We could talk about so many different things: the science of the virus itself, how the virus actually works, and the attacks the cell. You could talk about the so-called gene therapies that we call vaccines, and how it happened that we even called them vaccines, that the definition of vaccine and anti-vaxxer have been changed. The definition of herd immunity has been changed. The definition or the name of gain of function was changed by the NIH, right? So why make all these changes if you are so trustworthy, right? You see, we could be talking about what is the science of lockdown? So, is there any science about how lockdowns? What's the science of masks? What's the science of social distancing? The PCR tests, and how reliable are they? Are they even reliable? Right? Rapid testing kits, how reliable these are, the antigen tests. There's so many different things that we can talk about and utilize the scientific method to determine whether or not the results of the use of these particular tools are reliable, right? And much of the information we've come to know is that it's not as reliable as we originally thought that they were, right? Which means that the results, for instance, from PCR, from an antigen test, right? It give you false positives. It may even, just simply be reading something, detecting something in your DNA that's simply there. Doesn't tell you that you're sick, right? Right. And then we're counting all these cases on the basis of these tools. And it's like, well, okay. And why are we counting cases? Why aren't we counting antibodies, right? Why aren't we counting the number of deaths? We're going to shut down because there were new cases. Who cares? There were new cases. There are new cases of the common cold every day. There are new cases of the flu every day. There are new cases, of so many other things. Why are we focusing only on this particular sickness? Why only this sickness that we're focusing on it? You see, so when people don't see this, if we were putting so much effort and emphasis in something like the flu, then we'd probably be locking down for the flu as well, and then mandating flu vaccines. If we did the same thing for other type of diseases, which are much more deadly and they affect all people of all ages, then we probably would be like, okay, lockdown. Lockdown doesn't do anything. It's not, of course, it's about, like I said, not overwhelming the health services, as they say. Okay, well, all right, why lock down? And why not early treatment, right? So people don't have to go to the ER, right? But they prevent you. They won't let you get that, right? They won't let you use that, right? So I'm sorry for the tirade, but it makes you really, I wouldn't say that I'm angry. I am somewhat angry, but it's really frustrating at times because you see that so many people you love have actually fallen for the big trick. They fall for the big trick, the big lie, right? As we would say, right?
This next question, and since we're at an hour, there's this question is going to tie into this very beautifully, because you're talking about your family members, you're frustrated with them, your friends, they're not questioning. And so there's two things going on. The questions goes like this, and I'm kind of trying to tie it together as best as possible. But Dr. Mazen, he's been mentioning binge watching Netflix as a pastime. This is something people do a lot. It's not just Muslims. They're keeping you distracted, keeping you from questioning. Okay. And what the question says, I find that family members and friends that typically don't feel strongly about other ethical issues are it's difficult to read. Someone's who they're also apathetic to this manufactured crisis. I feel like you need a certain amount of activism and willingness to sacrifice all the things that you hold dear to stand up for what you believe is right and true. Hawk, right? What can one do to exhort their family members to take this seriously and to stand up for what's right and get out of their comfort zone? And this question was directed to Dr. Mazen. So what would you like to answer?
Yeah. First of all, I like to sometimes watch Netflix too. It's not a bad thing to watch Netflix necessarily. But the idea of using distractions and using, like this deploying, circus, bread and circus, this old tactic of bread and circus to distract people from what's actually going on, big issues of the time, it's a familiar thing. It works very conveniently with many of our own inner strategies. Once we start kind of understanding the psyche and trauma responses and the way we shut down and the way we disconnect from ourselves and dissociate and use these different things to kind of numb away or find comfort and find safety, they take advantage of that. They know these things. Just like people are becoming more trauma informed, I believe, Allahu Alam, the elites and the people, the powers that be, are also aware of these things and they use them to their advantage. Same with marketing. They know the psyche and the tricks and the loopholes of the psyche, and they use marketing gimmicks and tricks to get you to buy their stuff. And they're using it politically now to get you to buy into the narrative.
Right.
You see. And so it's very important that we be able to identify what are the ways that we're keeping ourselves bound. And one of the ways is this culture of circus and bread and circus and distraction. In terms of exhorting your family, good luck with that, right? Because it's a very difficult thing to call sometimes, most times, even ourselves properly, never mind other people. So the first and foremost recommendation is to really focus on yourself. And you'll find that as you begin to do that, you will begin to see things more clearly and begin to see potential in other people, where other people are, receptive to waking up, maybe we can say, receptive to being red-pilled, or maybe we can say green-pilled, where you can bring them wake them out of dunya, and really, this is all dunya. These are the familiar tactics of dunya. It's escalated, for sure, right? But it's dunya, and we have a faith that invites us to something beyond. Dunya is a drop in the ocean of reality, and people are so stuck in these things, in these games, and we need to be able to disidentify from them, unmesh ourselves from them, and find true freedom in that which lies beyond, which is the eternal truths of our religion, of the hereafter, of our faith. And this is really just to even attend to the previous question as well, right? We were created to be ummatan wasata. We are the last bastion of truth. We're the last, as Sheikh Hamza Yusuf says, we're the last train home. And this is not hubris, inshallah. This is not kibr and arrogance. This is amana.
Yeah.
This is amana. This is responsibility. And so we need to be able to not fall for the polarity and to see in some capacity, not the politicians and the powers that be and the shayateen, but the people, right, including our family, as vulnerable people and people that have been, harmed by this, and they're being dragged into it further and further, and to have compassion and to be a witness for it, right? We have to be a witness. We have been granted this capacity to see through the eternal face of our religion and the heart of iman, the light of iman in our hearts, and we have to be able to call ourselves and one another and our family members through that light. And may Allah give us tawfiq. It's a very hard thing to do, and we have to pray about it, and we have to get really clear about what it means for us. Is it an ego thing, or is it really us, trying to do well by Allah and responding to this responsibility and this amana?
It's a responsibility. I think it's like that saying of, if you want to see change, you have to start with yourself. You have to be the change yourself and set an example for your family. And, as I was saying a little while ago, like small things that you can do, put your foot forward and start moving. And, you might move your family, but ultimately it's Allah who guides, right? You make dua for them, you do your change, and inshallah they'll follow. We are at, capped out. It's 3:11 now, and I wanted to thank our audience. Thank you so much for showing up today. Please do share this with everybody that you know. One reminder that I have for you is to, if you have any questions, you can submit them to questions@balancingtheconversation.com. Here, let me pop that up for you right here. All right, hopefully you can see it. There you go. So you can submit your questions there, and we're going to be trying to cover them in the future episodes, inshallah. Next week, inshallah, we have a very special guest. He is our very own Muslim frontline doctor. His name is Dr. Syed Haider, who has treated over 4,000 patients. Sheikh Abdullah was talking about this earlier. This is your opportunity to have somebody, from your own faith come. You get to hear his testimony, so definitely stay tuned for next week. And he's going to be here to share his experience with us, inshallah. And with that, I would like to ask Sheikh Abdullah if you could please close this session with a dua for us.
Inshallah. Bismillah. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. ربنا آت أنفسنا تقواها وزكها أنت خير من زكاها أنت وليها ومولاها. ربنا آتنا من لدنك رحمة وهيئ لنا من أمرنا رشدا. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. وصلى اللهم وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه الأخيار وسلم تسليما كثيرا. وسبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. آمين. السلام عليكم.
Thank you. Next week. Assalamu alaikum.